Welcome to the Brodart Tell Me More Historical Voices webinar. Today we have two authors who will be sharing their stories with you, two very different styles of books. Our moderator is Dodie Owens. I've known Dodie for many years. Dodie has a classic library science background and an entrepreneurial spirit. She's worked with big name authors, major publishing houses, school librarians on the front lines, new technologies, and directors of leading libraries and research institutes. Working with the best in the marketplace, she brings a unique blend of editorial, sales, and marketing, as well as hardcore research skills. I'm so excited to have her moderating this webinar today. Over to you, Dodie.
Thank you, Elenita, and welcome everybody that's with us today. We have two fabulous authors lined up. We will be talking with Heather Moore, who will be talking about her book, Julia, which, if you want to get hungry first thing in the morning, this is what we should be talking about. And we'll be talking also to May Cobb, the author of All the Little Houses. Um, Both of them are super excited to be here. When we talked to May yesterday, she was attending a book conference in Atlanta. So she's been out there talking with people. And then when we talked to Heather, she did a little unveiling. We'll talk about that a little bit more too. So first, we're going to kick off with May talking about All the Little Houses. And she's got some things that she might not reveal. Go ahead, May.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dodie and Elenita, and I'm so happy to be here with Heather. Yeah, so All the Little Houses, which my background's blurred, so I'm going to put the book down. I am going to read really quick from the synopsis because the publisher did such a great job. Adults can behave badly too. It's the mid 1980s in the tiny town of Longview, Texas. And Nellie Anderson, the beautiful daughter of the Anderson family dynasty, has burst onto the scene. Nellie always gets what she wants. What she can't get for herself, well, that's what her mother, Charlie, is for. Because Charlie Anderson, blonde, beautiful, and ruthlessly cunning, remembers all too well having to claw her way to the top when she was coming of age on the poor side of town in East Texas. She was humiliated and shunned by the in crowd, whose approval she so desperately thirsted for. When a prairie kissed family moves to town, all trad wife, woodworking dad, wholesome daughter vibes, Charlie's entire self made social empire threatens to crumble. Who will be left standing when the dust settles? It's they describe it as a deliciously wicked new thriller about mean girls, mean moms, and all the delicious secrets inside all the little houses. Basically, all the little houses came as about out of my childhood fascination with the show Little House on the Prairie. I remember watching it on repeat in the 1980s. Usually it was at my grandparents' house because they watched it too. So it had that great multi-generational appeal. And I just remember sitting on their floor on my knees until my knees were like bald and shiny from sitting for so long and watching as much of it as I could. But because I write sort of soapy, sultry thrillers, I wanted to pay, tribute to it, but have it be set. It's not in the 1800s in Minnesota. It's as the jacket said, it's 1980s, deep East Texas, where I'm from. I'm from a small little town called Longview, and I've set most of my novels there. So I was, growing up, I was sympathized with the Laura Ingalls Wilder character. She was so plucky and determined, and then her parents were so hardworking and wholesome. And the dad always had those great winning, like down home homilies about, oh, we're the richest family in Walnut Grove, even though sometimes they would struggle to buy eggs and stuff. And I was also captivated by the bully of the show, Nellie, though. Nellie was such a devilishly wicked mean girl, and I'm always influenced by like Mean Girls. I love, the movie Mean Girls, the movie Heathers, and so I wanted to sort of, I don't know, really make a really mean girl. And getting to the historical part, I grew up in the 1980s, and I'm still so captivated by that era my first novel, Big Woods, was set in the 80s. And also, it was kind of by design because the show, I think it first aired in 74, but it ran all throughout the 1980s. So I kind of wanted to appeal to some of the people that grew up watching it like me, that would understand some of the references. And so I had so much fun with that era. I mean, the 80s, shoulder pads and adults chain smoking outdoors, but also indoors. And it had all the great music and the fluorescent clothes. And if you dropped in on me in the 1980s, I would be like, walking around my neighborhood in some scuffed up Ked sneakers and listening to Cyndi Lauper and Duran Duran and obviously Michael Jackson. And I had, way too much hairspray in my hair, and the perm that I had was insane. And anyway, we all love the 80s for its ridiculous fashion. So I had so much fun going back there. And it was also, it's pre-cell phone. So to do a thriller and make it really creepy, I think sometimes it's helpful to get the technology out of the way because my hometown has this weird mix. It's like very rich oil wealth. So there are these mansions that used to fascinate me when I was little. And then also there was a real eeriness to it. It's in the deep pine forest. So there were times where you felt like, I don't know, is anyone ever going to come to your side if you're in the woods and something happens? And so I wanted to ditch the cell phones and make it harder for my characters. The town is interesting. It had a population when I was growing up of like 70,000, but it was small and it was 2 hours away from any sort of big metropolitan area like Dallas. But we did have a mall, and in high school we got an Olive Garden. And so it's always fun to set stuff there, but especially in the 1980s. And I wanted to also showcase sort of the eerie beautifulness of the landscape there. It really is not what most people think about when they think of Texas. They think, Yellowstone or, Landsman, cattle steers and dusty ranches, but this is like the deep piney woods. And it also kind of feels like growing up, the town felt like a 1980s Stephen King novel to me. There was, you know, unexplained massive amounts of kidnappings and just other weird stuff that went on there. So in the 80s are just so alive in my memory, like frozen in time. And let's see, I remember being in high school, and one of the things that we did was drink from kegs of beer in the woods. And so I also wanted to celebrate that in this book where you've got teens behaving badly, adults behaving badly, and what that might look like. And our main character, Nellie, drives around town in her red BMW, drinking like her cherry limeade from Sonic, but of course it's spiked with vodka. And I mean, she's 18, so she shouldn't be drinking. But anyway, she's a very like edgy teen. And the other thing is, I sort of in that era of the 80s, it was really the anti-helicopter parenting age. And I wanted to run with that too, because the kids were really just kind of on their own then, and they were running the show and running the town. And when the parents would go to sleep, they would drive the parents' cars around town, at 15. So basically, I would just, yeah. So All the Little Houses is a soapy thriller, and it is set in Longview, but I sort of fictionalized it a little to where it's this very affluent lakeside enclave with the town's social hierarchy that gets thrown into chaos when the new family arrives, the sort of Ingalls Wilder version. Um, and so you have the one family, that Nellie and her mom who are trying to hold on to their status. And then you have the newcomers, which is the Swift family. And so Ethan Swift's the dad, and he's a carpenter, and they have this farm and they grow all their own food. And the mom is basically she's like a 1980s version of a trad wife. And she also makes love potions out of essential oils that she, of course, makes from her own herbs. And so quickly, all of Charlie's like rich, uber wealthy friends become kind of mesmerized by this family, and Charlie starts to feel threatened. And then Nellie can't stand that the new girl, their daughter, Jane, who's the Laura Ingalls character, has suddenly become the most popular girl in school, even though she comes of very little means. And then, of course, Jane has a secret boyfriend that Nellie becomes obsessed with. So that sort of becomes the whole powder keg issue because once Nellie has something in her sights, I mean, she'll plow you over with her jet ski, if you're not if you're not careful. And the mom, like I said, she's sort of like a 1980s version of a trad wife. And then there's Jane's older sister, Julia, who is a little bit like Mary from the show. She's more serious, a little more stern, maybe a little more bookish. Um, but there's also something going on with Mary. She's a beekeeper and she's always lurking. And there's a lot more happening under the surface with the character Julia that I created. And basically the Swift family has kind of, like I said, mesmerized the whole town. And Charlie is really flipping out, and her confidant is this her best friend named Jackson, who is probably the most likable character in the book. He might be the only likable character in the book. He is a wildly talented interior designer. He's super loyal friend to Charlie, even though she is very extra and demanding. He's mostly closeted. It is the 1980s in a small town in East Texas. And they spend their afternoons not only decorating her 10,000 square foot mansion, but also sipping frozen daiquiris and frozen margaritas at a members only club, lakeside. Well, Jackson also becomes mesmerized with the Swifts. And I don't want to spoil anything, but when he and Ethan Swift begin an affair, it's like the biggest betrayal to Charlie. And so there's a lot of secrets and lies, betrayals, rivalries, revenge. I kind of think of it like Big Little Lies meets Dallas. I grew up, not only watching Little House, there was, I mean, what was there, like 8 shows on back then that we had to pick from? So, you had your Fantasy Island and the Love Boat. But I was really tuned into Dallas and Dynasty. And so, because this is set in the 80s, I wanted to sort of tap into that 1980s nighttime soap trope. And so, like halfway through the book, you have I won't give it away, but one of the characters is in a coma. And so the rest of it's like a soap opera. Like, are they going to wake up? Are they going to be able to point to the police who did this to them? Are they going to make it? And I just had great fun with it. I feel like writing about rich people behaving badly, especially in the 80s when there's so much, at least in Longview, Texas, we were still, not my family personally, but the families I witnessed were riding super high off of before the recession, off of the oil boom. And so, I mean, you had people driving around in Jaguars and, I just can't even describe the wealth that I witnessed. And sort of it's almost like rich people behaving badly lets you go into black comedy a little bit more. Kind of like a little like White Lotus or Sirens, the recent shows, because the normal rules don't apply for the uber wealthy. And so you can have really fun and go, over the top. And it's more like it's reality, but not reality because it's their reality.
So
I hope,
I think Dodie has some questions for you about it. We don't want to
yeah,
give away the whole book.
yeah, definitely. And that's pretty much that's my spiel. So I would love to hop into some questions.
All right. Thanks, May. I like how you described it as a soapy, sultry thriller. Um, I kind of grew up on the soaps, and a coma is a soap opera's best friend. It can really draw out the mystery for a long time. Um, the cover is fabulous. It's it hints at tragedy without being too in your face. Um, I also, we in our training yesterday, we talked a little bit about how a book from the 80s is historical, and it is because it happened a long time ago. There's shows on PBS about the 80s now, so that makes it officially historical.
So
Um,
wild to me.
yeah, it is wild. Um, One of the reviewers called you an empress of women's wrongs, and I really love that because it sounds like your main character, even though she's looking to do wrong, there's been wrong done to her in a different way. Society's pressures. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think just for both mother and daughter, the mother grew up really poor, like I said, humiliated and bullied by the women that she's now best friends with or frenemies with. So she's constantly insecure, even though she has this life of privilege. And then Nellie, the daughter, because her mom's so insecure, she has been over mothering Nellie, poor Nellie, since day one. And Nellie didn't come out angelic. She's definitely a bad seed. And so it's this kind of combination of she's spoiled and entitled, and then the mother covers up for her. And it's kind of a bad combination because the mom wants her to have everything and be everything. But she is she's edgy and she's kind of she's kind of like the a little bit of the outsider with her own rich clique. They have to hang out with her because that's her social status, but nobody really likes her.
Mhm.
So you kind of feel sorry for her, I guess. I don't know.
Now, when I was spying on you, I saw that you have a nonfiction book that's been in your back pocket for a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, for about 25 years. So I'm really hoping to finish it one day. And I don't know if you want me to talk about it, but
Well, I'm intrigued because it's about a blind musician.
yes, his name was Rasan Roland Kirk, and he was blind from an accident when he was two. And but he was incredible force of nature, and he taught himself to play three saxophones at the same time. And music came to him through dreams. And when he was 39, he had a paralyzing stroke. And the doctors told him, yeah, I'm sorry, you're not going to be able to write music again. But he not only wrote music, he actually taught himself to play with just one hand. So he just was an incredible, and I felt this weird connection to him, and he died on my fourth birthday. So I felt compelled. I spent years retracing his footsteps, staying at his home with his widow. We're really close, and trying to collect as many stories about him as I could.
I think that's really interesting. Music is something that is part of everybody's life, and sometimes you just take it for granted. My last question for you, well, observation. One of your former books is The Hollywood Assistant. And when I was digging around, I found out that you lived the life of the Hollywood assistant. You want to give listeners just a little quick chat on what that was like?
Yeah, it was incredible. I worked for writer director Ron Shelton and his wife, the actor Lolita Davidovich. They were wonderful to me. We're still very close to this day, and it was just sort of the initial inspiration for the book. But my experience didn't have the obsession and murder that the book and it was a great experience. It was one of those, like, I think it was my favorite job I've ever had. So
That's very cool. That's very cool. So we're going to move on
Before you
to,
do,
oh,
we have a
yeah,
question
Elenita.
of one of the people that registered. I'm a teen from the 70s rather than the 80s, but this still sounds really fun. Shades of Knots Landing too. I don't love unlikable characters, but this sounds great. Is the setting almost another character? Jackson reminds me of a bit of Truman Capote. So would you say the setting is another character?
oh, definitely. I think so too. And what a great question. And also Knots Landing fan.
All right, thank you.
All right. We are going to move on to Heather now, who and talk about fabulous covers. This one is beautiful, and I'm going to give Heather a few moments to talk about her inspirations for the book and what she's working on next and what she's thinking about getting this book out in September. Go ahead, Heather.
Well, thank you so much, Dodie. And it's great to be here with Alanita. And also, May, your book sounds like exactly what I need to read because I am a teenager of the 80s. So it sounds really fabulous. Anyway, so Julia, which is a simple title, a lot of my titles I feel like are way too long, is a historical novel based on Julia Child. And interestingly enough, I feel like there's something in the water out there because last year and this year there have been a couple books coming out, other historical novels on Julia Child, but of course they're all different. My theory is you can give 10 writers the same topic to write about, and they'll come up with a different story. My book actually can be considered biographical fiction because there are no fictional characters, there's no fictional events, but it does read like a novel, and it does, of course, highlight Julia's larger than life personality. The whole book is in her point of view. When my publisher and I were first kind of brainstorming book ideas, we had talked about Julia Child because she served in World War II, and I had been kind of writing World War II novels for a couple years. And so it was interesting because I thought, okay, I'm going to write this whole book set in the war. But as I started researching her, I thought I'm going to do my readers a disservice if I don't include her journey to becoming the French chef, which is, I think everybody would be expecting that. And so the book is actually in two parts. They're cohesive, and it's not like there's a big time gap. But the first part one is about her serving in the OSS, which is a precursor to the CIA. Um, she ended up serving overseas in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, and that is where she met her husband, Paul Child. And then the second part of the book is follows her when she gets married, and Paul gets assigned to Paris for 5 years, where he works for the United States Information Service as an exhibits officer, which meant that he was promoting French-American relations through art world. So she grew up in Pasadena in a wealthy family. They had a chef, they had a maid. So she really didn't cook very much. Her mother didn't cook. Sometimes on the weekends, her mother would kind of make biscuits and gravy type of meal. And so when Julia, though, was very serious with Paul, the war was over, they're back in the United States, writing letters to each other. She decided to take a cooking class because she thought, if I'm going to be a wife, this is the 1940s, right? The wives stay at home and cook. And so she thought, I'm going to get more domesticated. So she took a cooking class. She had a lot of mishaps, which happens throughout her life, which is very endearing to us because even when she was on television, she always had mishaps. But she ended up trying French food when she first landed in France, and she fell in love immediately. Her first meal was, and I don't know if I can say this right, sole meunière, and it's a fish recipe. And she just was completely in love with French food. And they were on a budget with Paul's job, but she had an inheritance from her mother. So she dedicated that inheritance to eating out basically every night at a different restaurant in Paris. In fact, she indulged so much in delicious French cuisine and wine that she was pretty sure she was pregnant. So she went to the doctor, and he told her that no, she was not pregnant. She was just bloated from too much cream and butter. And it's kind of humorous. Like, it was funny, but it's also a little bit sad because she never did end up having children, and she did want children. Another thing is that after that, she became very devoted in learning the language, learning how to cook, and she ended up taking some cooking classes, and that led to enrolling in Le Cordon Bleu, which is very famous French cooking school. She did clash terribly with the director of the school, and she almost didn't graduate because of their headbutting. But she did have a wonderful connection with the main chef there, which was Max. I am going to say his name wrong again, Bagnard. That's probably the American way to say it. Through like parties and networking, she met two French women, Simone Beck and Louisetta Bartol, and they were writing a cookbook and they were trying to get it published in the United States. And the publisher said, this cookbook is too French and American cooks will not be able to use it and work with it. And so you need to find it in an American cook to help you kind of revise the recipes and make it more American friendly. So they invited Julia to do this. And in her mind, she thought, oh, I'm going to test some recipes and maybe, rewrite some of the, the instructions. Well, it ended up being a 9-year project. They went through 3 publishers and they finally got this. It was a giant cookbook, over 300 pages, when it was finally published, which is Mastering the Art of French Cooking. So during this time, as she was testing recipes and creating them and working with her cookbook authors, they spent 5 years in Paris, then they moved to Marseille, and then 2 years in Germany and 2 years in Norway. And basically it took that entire time for her cookbook to be ready to be published. So by the time they moved back to the United States, she was 49 years old. Her husband decided to retire because his health had been going downhill. And he was also 60 by then. And so by the time her cookbook was out, she was 49. And this will interest writers out there and librarians as well, because she funded her own book tour. She just stayed with friends and family across the United States. She booked any place that would let her do a cooking demonstration, which included libraries, department stores, women lunch clubs. And her faithful retired husband, was a guy setting up the set. He was washing dishes in the women's bathroom, and he was just really the hands-on support behind her. Her really big break came when the book was out and she was invited to be on a public television show in Boston. And it was actually a book club show. And so she showed up having this cookbook, and on a hot plate, she made an omelet. And the TV station, after that aired, it was inundated with letters saying, we love Julia, we want more of her. And that's when the television station decided to put together a cooking show. And this is public television, so she did not get paid a lot. She barely covered for expensive food, but it was called The French Chef, and that's kind of springboarded her career. And just in conclusion, I just want to give you a couple fun facts about her, is that she loved cats. She adopted multiple stray cats. She was also a natural athlete, an avid golfer, and a tennis player. When she met her husband, Paul Child, in Ceylon, she thought he was short, balding, and old. And later she decided that he was handsome. She was 34 when she married. He was 44. She was 6'2". Her husband was 5'9", and her younger sister, Dorothy, was 6'4". So definitely a tall family. But that's kind of Julia in a nutshell.
Well, didn't her height hold her back on some things? Like when she,
Yeah, so exactly when Pearl Harbor happened, and she was working for the Red Cross in Southern California, and she tried to apply for the waves and the WAC, and they told her she was too tall.
She was an amazing person, absolutely amazing. I just remember her being very tall because she made everybody around her look small.
Yeah.
This cover just keeps blowing me away. I want to like wipe my finger across it and see if the flower moves. Great job by the cover designer. Yeah, you had a really lovely review in Library Journal, and one of the things that was in that review was saying that Julia basically traded her country club for covert codes.
Mhm.
And I think that speaks to her intelligence. Did you find that when you were doing research that she was just a very highly intelligent person?
She had a very good memory. She was definitely a perfectionist. She was very, very social, very giving and outgoing type of personality. But one of her strengths working for the OSS is that she was basically tracking hundreds of names when she was helping with the spy network. She wasn't a spy in the field, but she was kind of the behind the scenes, making sure everybody knew where their coordinates were. And so she she just had one of those brains that could remember stuff. And even as she was like testing recipes, her philosophy was she didn't want any guesswork. So if you happen to have one of her cookbooks, like it basically just spells out everything you need to do and everything is in order of what you do instead of just throwing out the ingredients and then just saying, giving a couple instructions. So that's why her cookbooks are so long and in depth.
Yeah, I'm actually on a RUSA awards committee for cookbooks. And that's one of the things that we have in our rubric is that you have to make sure that you step people through the recipe carefully. And we always harken back to the classic cookbooks for setting a great example. I ran across a really fun Facebook post of yours, Heather, of you and your daughter doing an unboxing at a little French cafe. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I got my box of books, I knew what it was, of course, because it had my publisher's address on it. And I thought, I do not want to open this box in my boring home with boring brown carpet. I want to go to like a French cafe and open it. And so I had never been to this place. It's not too far from my house, but we went in there and it was so delightful because it was a man he was just the French guy. He spoke French, he spoke English, but is very accented. So I just felt like I was being propelled into her novel. And so we filmed a little bit in the store, but we went outside to the cafe tables, and that's where I did unboxing. So that was just really fun, and I was able to do that with this type of book.
Yeah, I just love when authors are still excited. I mean, I wonder if James Patterson still gets excited when a box of books show up at his house. So, um, what was the other question I had for you? Oh, are there recipes in the book?
So because of everything being copyrighted, the only recipes in the book I had are the ones that her mother used on her weekend little family meal. So you'll see just a couple recipes in there. But I do have a recipe. One of the first things she learned to cook was a chicken dish that she learned from her sister-in-law, who is Paul. So Paul Child was a twin, and Julia became really close to Freddie, who is her sister-in-law. And it was the coq au vin, the chicken with the wine. And so I have that recipe in there just because it's kind of a standard recipe that wasn't necessarily copyrighted in her cookbook.
I love that. I love little jewels inside of books like that. So, do we have any questions from attendees? I'm looking in the Q&A.
Doesn't look like it.
Doesn't look like it right now. Um, I did have another question for Heather. Oh, when Julia was serving in the OSS, was Paul aware of it?
Yeah, so they were both serving in the same city. So they're serving it's called Candy with a K, and it's basically the mountain region of Ceylon. And so they interacted, they met there, they would smoke together and they'd go on walks together and they'd go swimming together. So, but Paul was kind of a ladies' man, and Julia had her heart broken by a man she had met in Washington, D.C. before the war. And he had kind of ran off and married someone else from his hometown. But she was also pursued by Harrison Chandler, whose father owned the LA Times. So they were thrown together a lot in their high elite social circles. So when she met Paul, she's a little bit jaded, but also a little bit hesitant just because he was very intelligent, very artsy. Um, so she felt intimidated by that because she even though she did go to college, she went to Smith College, and she did have a wonderful memory, is that she wasn't a reader until she met him, and he would read to her, and so that was kind of how their romance started. It was a very, very slow burn romance.
Well, I'm glad they found each other because they wrote a beautiful story together. Well, if we don't have any questions, Elenita, did you have any last mentions that you want to get in?
I just have to say that I enjoyed both of the books, very different. And you really built the characters well. I love the romance, the way Julia and Paul, like you said, it was a slow burn, but it was more intellectual. And there was insecurity on both sides. I thought that was really sweet. And just, Julia Child, her, so it was really fun to read that. And then Nellie and Charlie, oh my gosh, what a duo, mother and daughter, and talk about two women that are not authentic and really have some problems with society. But it was a really enjoyable read. So thank you so much. Do you guys have questions for each other?
No, I really can't
Yeah.
wait to read Heather. I really can't wait to read Julia Heather. I'm so looking forward to it. And thank y'all for having us. I mean,
Yeah,
it's so
thank
much
you.
fun.
And
Thank
I'm
you
excited for
the
May's
book.
book, and it comes out, was it January I saw?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, countdown.
Thank you for these books and for sharing with us. They're really great. And I know Dodie yesterday mentioned that, these books will go on a staff pick, and she's talking about book clubs, having you guys there. So we're just really excited to have you and to be sharing your books with everyone. And books can be bought obviously through Broad Art for the libraries. And we just want to thank you and thank your Source Books and Shadow Mountain Publishing for publishing your books and sharing you with us.
Thank you.
Thank
So.
you very much.